The sun hung low over the border town of Las Aguas Rojas, turning the dust in the air into a golden haze that clung to skin and stung eyes. People gathered in the main square, drawn not by celebration or festival, but by something far darker, an auction that most pretended to disapprove of, yet attended all the same. The wooden platform at the center of the square creaked under the shifting weight of the auctioneer, who wiped sweat from his brow as he prepared to display the final offering of the day. Beside him stood the young Comanche woman. Her wrists were bound loosely, almost ceremonially, not for restraint but for show. She held herself upright, spine straight, chin lifted in defiance. The bruises on her face, the torn leather dress, and the raw scrape along her collarbone only seemed to strengthen the intensity in her dark eyes. Ayana, that was the name they had taken from the captors who dragged her here. The auctioneer introduced her as if she were livestock, but she never lowered her gaze. The crowd murmured, whispered, "She's Comanche. Too dangerous. You buy her, and her people come lookin'. Nobody wants that." The fear in their voices was real. Stories had always circulated about Comanche warriors' fast horses, fierce tempers, vengeance that could chase a man across miles of broken desert. Whether any of the tales were true didn't matter. The fear itself was enough to keep hands down and pockets closed. The auctioneer cleared his throat and tried his best to inject enthusiasm into his voice. "Now, folks, she's young, strong, skilled. A real hard worker, I'm sure. Who'll start the bidding at $5? Silence. Ayana stared forward without blinking, looking at no one in particular, yet seeing everything. Her pride, her dignity, her spirit, they refused to crumble, even as the heat pressed down on her like punishment. The wind carried sand across the platform, clattering like tiny bones. No bids? The auctioneer tried again, louder this time. $4. A fine price for still nothing. A few men shifted, glancing around nervously as though anyone who stepped forward might be inviting a curse. Ayana's lips parted slightly, not in fear, but in almost amused disbelief. They had brought her here to sell, yet now the men were too afraid to buy. It should have humiliated her. Instead, a quiet sense of triumph flickered in her chest. The auctioneer grew increasingly desperate. He wiped his forehead again, sputtering. $3 then. She can work, cook, ride, she's healthy, just needs some care. No one moved. The energy in the crowd shifted from interest to discomfort. Children tugged at their mothers' skirts. A few of the rougher men who had arrived to buy anyone looked irritated. They wouldn't dare step forward. Not with a Comanche. $2. Barked the auctioneer. "Someone take her off my hands for the love of nothing." Ayana closed her eyes briefly. In that moment she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. Not because she was unsold, but because she understood the truth. She was alone, surrounded by enemies with no guarantee of escape. If no one bid, she would be returned to the Comancheros who captured her, and that fate was far worse than anything this town could offer. The auctioneer slammed his hat to the ground. $1. Just one damn dollar. The silence after that shot was louder than any gunshot, and then a figure in the back of the crowd shifted. A tall man, silent until now, stepped forward. His hair braided in the Apache style, his face unreadable, his movements calm as cooled stone. The townsfolk parted instinctively, whispering now with a new tone unease, mixed with fascination. He walked toward the platform without hurry. Ayana lifted her gaze, eyes narrowing. The quiet Apache had come forward. For a moment, the square seemed to hold its breath. The dust hung still in the air, as if the entire town waited to see what the solitary figure would do. The man walked with the easy, grounded steps of someone who had lived more on trails than on roads. His clothing was simple buckskin shirt worn from years of weather. Dark trousers patched carefully by hand, a knife strapped to his belt. His long, black hair was braided in the traditional style of his people, the Apache. Some recognized him. Others had only heard whispers. He was neither outlaw nor friend to the settlers. Not Comanche. Not Mexican. Not white. A man whose presence quietly unsettled everyone. Because he seemed to belong entirely to no one, the auctioneer blinked at him in disbelief. You're making a bid? Dakota didn't answer with words at first. He reached into a small pouch tied at his hip and withdrew something wrapped in leather. When he opened it, the crowd leaned forward. Inside lay a few silver coins mixed with beads, far less than what even a mule would cost at auction. That's not enough, someone hissed. Barely buys a hat. He's mocking the auction. But Dakota wasn't mocking anything. His face stayed calm, almost impassive, as he extended the offering to the auctioneer. Not arrogant, not pleading. Just quiet, firm. The auctioneer hesitated. Legally, or rather, illegally, he had the right to ask for more. But no one else had stepped forward. And the Comancheros who had delivered the girl had already demanded their payment earlier, threatening him with a knife. Keeping her unsold was a risk he wasn't willing to take. He cleared his throat, wiped his palms on his vest, and mumbled, "Fine, accepted." Then louder, "Bid accepted." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Ayana's eyes snapped to Dakota, studying him with sharp intensity. His gaze met hers, not with possession, not with triumph. Not with the gloating that many buyers showed, but with something she had not expected at all. Respect. Distance. Understanding God as if he knew exactly what it meant to stand alone before a hostile crowd. She did not lower her head. She wouldn't give him or anyone her surrender. But the hardness in her chest shifted, just slightly, into curiosity. Dakota stepped back as the auctioneer cut the rope binding her wrists and shoved her lightly toward her buyer. The crowd's eyes followed every movement. "She's yours." "Apache," someone said mockingly from the side. "Hope you know what you're getting into," another added. "Maybe the two tribes can kill each other off," a third snickered. Dakota reacted to none of it. He simply nodded once to Ayana, an acknowledgement rather than a command. "Come," he said softly. The single word carried no force, no expectation. It sounded more like an invitation than a directive. That alone made the townspeople frown in confusion. Ayana crossed her arms, planting her feet firmly on the dusty ground. "I do not go with you," she said in heavily accented English. "I go with no man." Her voice was sharp, proud, and unwavering. The auctioneer groaned under his breath. The last thing he wanted was another scene. Dakota didn't move closer. He didn't threaten her, didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived worse than insults and stares. "You are not mine," he said. "You choose your path. But these men," he glanced toward the outskirts where dust trails hinted at riders waiting, "they will come for you." Ayana stiffened. She knew exactly who he meant. The Comancheros who wanted their prize back. Dakota continued, voice barely above the wind. "I walk east. If you want safety, walk with me. If not, you are free." The simplicity of his words stunned not only Ayana, but the entire crowd. Who buys a woman just to set her free? Ayana hesitated only a second long enough to feel both suspicion and a spark of reluctant hope. Before stepping off the platform, she did not answer him. But she walked in the same direction he did, not behind him, beside him. The town of Las Aguas Rojas shrank behind them with every step, the sound of voices fading into the dry wind. The sun dipped lower, slanting across the desert in long stripes of copper and red. Ayana kept pace with Dakota, though she left several feet of space between them, space filled with suspicion. tension, and a raw memory of humiliation. When they reached the outskirts, Dakota stopped beside an outcropping of rock where the trail forked in two directions. He turned to face her. She did not flinch. She met his gaze head-on, hands clenched, chin lifted. He spoke first. "You walk east because you fear the men who took you." His tone was calm, not accusing. "But you do not owe me for that." Ayana's jaw tightened. "I owe you nothing." Her words cut through the wind like a blade. Dakota simply nodded, accepting her anger as if it were natural. "Good. Debt between us would be wrong." The answer stole a fraction of her breath. Most men in situations like this spoke of payment, of obedience, of what they believed they deserved because they had spent a coin. But he stood before her without demand, without expectation, without the hunger she had seen in others' eyes. She narrowed her gaze. "Why did you bid, Apache? What do you want from me?" Dakota looked toward the distant hills before answering. "I have seen too many taken and traded, too many treated as things." He paused. "I could not watch another." Ayana stared, searching his expression for deceit. All she found was quiet sadness buried beneath layers of self-control. But trust did not come easily. Not after everything she'd endured. She crossed her arms and spoke deliberately, each word chosen carefully. "Hear me, I am Comanche. I am not wife, nor servant, nor slave. You did not buy me." Her voice shook with strength, not fear. "I will not be owned." Dakota bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her declaration as though it were a sacred oath. "You are not owned," he said. "Not by me, not by anyone." His acceptance disarmed her more than any argument could have. She had expected resistance, anger, perhaps even force. Instead, she found a man who treated her decision as indisputable truth. Still, she kept her distance. She eyed him critically. "Then why ask me to walk with you?" He lifted one shoulder as if the answer were obvious. "Because alone, injured and hunted, you will die." His voice remained steady. "And I do not want that." The honesty in his words stung. It forced her to acknowledge the throbbing pain in her ribs, the sting of the gash on her thigh, the exhaustion dragging through her muscles. She hated the weakness forced on her by her captors. She hated even more that Dakota saw it. Ayana looked away, glaring at the horizon. "I would rather die free than live as property." "Good," Dakota said quietly. "Then walk free. Just not alone." The wind carried the scent of dust and juniper between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Ayana shifted her weight, feeling torn between pride and survival. She could not trust this Apache, but she trusted the intentions of the men hunting her even less. Finally, she spoke. "I walk with you until danger passes. Then I go my own way." Dakota nodded. "As you wish." With that, he turned east, taking the narrow path that led away from the town's view. Ayana followed, still maintaining several steps of separation, her eyes on his back. But something had changed. Not trust. Not yet. But the spark of understanding had been lit, fragile, unsteady, but real. She was not his. She would never be anyone's. And yet, for now, she walked beside him, not by command, but by choice. The trail leaving Las Aguas Rojas was narrow, winding through jagged rocks and sparse desert brush. The heat lingered even as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch toward them like grasping hands. Dakota moved with deliberate calm, his horse steady beneath him, hooves stirring the dust in a slow rhythm. Ayana followed on her own horse, muscles tense, every sense alert. The open desert behind them offered no comfort, only the knowledge that the town and the men who had captured her still lingered in the distance. The silence between them was deliberate. Dakota said little, but each step of his horse carried purpose. Ayana, wary and watchful, studied him out of the corner of her eye. There was no arrogance in his movement, no sense of triumph in his stride. Unlike the auctioneer or the men who had brought her here, he carried no ownership, only intention. And that intention, she realized, was to protect, not possess. "You know," she said at last, her voice low and measured, "most men would have beaten me, forced me, claimed what they bought." Dakota glanced at her, expression unreadable. "Then most men are weak," her brows furrowed. "Weak? They would have gotten what they wanted." "Perhaps," he said. "But strength is in knowing what should not be taken." Ayana considered that eyes on the horizon. There was truth in it. Too much truth. Her jaw tightened, her pride flaring, but she said nothing more. As they navigated a narrow pass between two rocky outcrops, the first signs of pursuit became clear. Dust clouds billowed in the distance, stirred by hooves pounding across the earth. Dakota slowed slightly, peering into the shadows where the Comancheros might emerge. He gestured with his hand, signaling Ayana to stay close yet maintain readiness. She obeyed instinctively, the muscle memory of danger sharpening her senses. The desert itself seemed to conspire against them. Loose stones skittered under the hooves, brush snagged at legs, and the wind carried strange, unsettling noises. Every rustle or crack of a branch made her heart spike. But she noticed something that made her grip on the reins tighten. Dakota never flinched, never hesitated. His calm was a shield she could feel in the air, as if his presence alone could steady the panic rising in her chest. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the soft snort of horses and the distant rumble of pursuit. Ayana's injuries reminded her of her vulnerability, the scraped ribs that burned with each movement, the swollen ankle that had gone untreated since capture. Dakota noticed without comment. When she faltered over a rough patch, he silently dismounted, offering her his horse without a word. She shook her head, refusing, though a flicker of gratitude passed through her eyes. He accepted her refusal, climbing back into his saddle with the same quiet patience. As dusk turned to night, the stars began to pierce the desert sky. The temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on rock surfaces, making footing treacherous. The cold cut through her thin dress and worn leggings, reminding Ayana of her near helplessness. Dakota's presence remained a steadying force. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving her space but never straying far from her line of sight. Finally, after what seemed like endless hours of riding through rock-strewn paths and treacherous slopes, Dakota paused near a cluster of scrub oaken boulders. The sound of pursuit had faded, though Ayana knew the danger was far from over. She dismounted, legs trembling slightly, and felt a mixture of relief and unease. "You could leave now," Dakota said quietly, the stars glinting off his dark eyes. "The town is behind you. No one is chasing you. For the moment." Ayana shook her head, brushing dust from her dress. "I will not run blindly. I will survive on my own terms." Dakota studied her silently for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That is why you walk with me. Not because you must, but because it is the wisest choice." The desert stretched endlessly around them, dark and filled with danger. But for the first time since the auction, Ayana felt the faintest hint of trust, a fragile ember in the night that might, someday, grow into something stronger. The night pressed in around them like a living thing. Shadows twisted and lengthened in the cold desert air, and the faint cries of nocturnal creatures echoed across the canyon walls. Ayana's muscles ached from the long ride, every step reminding her of the bruises, scrapes, and exhaustion that threatened to slow her. But sleep was a luxury she could not afford. Somewhere behind them, the Comancheros were moving, relentless as vultures, searching for their lost prize. Dakota had sensed their presence long before the first hoofbeats were audible. He spoke little, moving with the confidence of a man who had spent his life reading the land and predicting danger. Every path, every rocky ridge, every shallow gully was part of a mental map he had memorized. A map that now served as a trap for the pursuers. Ayana's horse stumbled over loose gravel, and she instinctively drew her breath sharply, catching herself with a sudden violent grip on the reins. Dakota glanced back, eyes calm but alert. "Keep moving. Don't hesitate," he said softly. "The moment fear slows you is the moment they catch up." Her pride flared. She would not falter. She would not appear weak, not in front of him, not in front of anyone. "I know what I'm doing," she said, though the words carried less confidence than she intended. The chase began in earnest, when the first shouts pierced the still night. Torches bobbed on the horizon, flickering like fireflies, but the shadows in their glow were menacing, unrelenting. The Comancheros had spotted them. Ayana's heart raced not from fear of the unknown, but from the certainty that the men behind them had no intention of mercy. Dakota guided them into a narrow canyon, the walls steep on either side. "Stay close. Follow my lead," he instructed, voice low but commanding. He had ridden this terrain many times before. He knew where horses could find footing, where rocks could provide cover, and where an ambush could be laid. Ayana obeyed, her pulse hammering in rhythm with the hooves of her own horse. The Comancheros attempted to split up, sending 2 men around the canyon rim to flank them. But Dakota's eyes caught every subtle movement. He guided Ayana toward a hidden ridge, one barely visible in the moonlight. "Hold your horse steady," he said, dismounting with fluid ease. He dropped to one knee, surveying the terrain. Ayana followed suit, trusting him enough now to step into the shadows beside him. Her breath came in ragged bursts. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Too many times," he admitted. No emotion passed over his face, but Ayana caught the slight tightening of his jaw. "I've lost people I cared for. I will not lose you tonight if I can help it." The first 2 Comancheros came into view, their torches illuminating the jagged rocks. Dakota sprang into action, signaling to Ayana to stay low. Using the canyon walls for cover, he moved silently, his presence almost ghost-like. Ayana mirrored him as best she could, her own movements cautious but determined. Together they navigated the terrain, Dakota leading, Ayana learning from every step. By the time the Comancheros realized the pair had disappeared from sight, Dakota and Ayana were already out of the narrow canyon, moving along a ridge that gave them the high ground. The pursuers cursed and shouted below, but the Apache and the Comanche had vanished into the night, blending with the shadows. For the first time since the auction, Ayana allowed herself to exhale. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but there was exhilaration too, the knowledge that she was surviving, not merely fleeing. She glanced at Dakota, who rode a few steps ahead, quiet as ever, a figure of steady strength against the sprawling desert. "You saved me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. He did not respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Then finally he said, "We save each other out here. That is how it works." Ayana considered his words carefully. She had always thought survival was a solitary act. Now, side by side with this quiet Apache, she understood it could be shared. Even forged in trust, forged under fire, and as the desert night swallowed them once more, she realized the chase was far from over, and yet, for the first time in weeks, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. The first hints of dawn bled across the horizon as Dakota guided Ayana into a narrow, secluded gorge. Its entrance was hidden behind a cluster of jagged boulders, almost invisible from the trail. The morning air was cold, crisp with the scent of desert sage and pine, carrying the faint tang of distant snow on the high mesas. Here, at last, there was a sense of temporary safety. Dakota dismounted and offered Ayanna his hand to steady herself. Her muscles protested, each step sharp with reminders of her injuries, the scraped ribs, the swollen ankle, and the ache in her thighs from hours of riding. She accepted his hand reluctantly, pride warring with necessity. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a flat rock warmed by the sun. She obeyed, brushing dust from her torn dress as she lowered herself, the slight tremor in her legs betraying her exhaustion. Dakota moved nearby, crouching against another rock, eyes scanning the gorge for any hint of pursuit. The silence between them was heavy, yet not uncomfortable. It was a silence full of understanding, a momentary truce with the world. He reached into his satchel and produced a small flask of water and some dried meat. He handed it to her without comment. She took a cautious sip and then a small bite, tasting survival more than sustenance. "You were brave," he said finally, breaking the quiet. His voice was calm, measured, almost soft, but it carried weight. Most would have faltered long before the Comancheros reached the canyon. Ayanna met his gaze, her dark eyes suspicious. "Bravery doesn't mean recklessness." "I survived because I had no other choice." He nodded. "Choice is a luxury few have in this world. You made the best of what you were given. That is strength." She looked away, her eyes tracing the ridges above the gorge. "Why do you help me? You don't even know me." Dakota's eyes darkened, fixed on a distant point. "I've seen too many women taken, too many lives destroyed. I could not allow another to be traded as property. That is reason enough." The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. Ayanna felt a stirring of something she had not allowed herself to feel since her capture gratitude. Not for charity, not for pity, but for recognition. He had seen her as a person, not a commodity. She swallowed hard, fighting the vulnerability that threatened to surface. Most men who buy a woman at auction, they don't care who she is. They only care what they can take. Dakota's jaw tightened slightly. "I am not most men." For a long moment she studied him, trying to read the quiet lines of his face, the steady calm in his movements. There was a story there, buried beneath the calm exterior, a past of loss, of survival, perhaps even of exile. She sensed the weight he carried, even though he never spoke of it. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter. "You're different. I can see it. But I don't know you. And yet you walk with me," he replied. His tone carried no pride, no arrogance, just observation. Ayanna turned her gaze to the gorge walls, studying the shadows and the sunlight streaking across the rocks. For the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to relax slightly. She was not alone. Not entirely. And though the future remained uncertain, she knew one thing. Dakota had given her a choice she had not expected. She would survive this night, not as a captive, not as property, but as herself wounded, wary, but unbroken. And in that quiet gorge, as the wind whispered through the rocks and the morning light warmed her bruised skin, Ayanna felt something unfamiliar yet powerful, the first stirrings of trust. Dakota watched her for a long moment, silent, his own eyes carrying stories he would not yet tell. In that shared silence, a fragile bond began to form, one forged not by ownership or obligation, but by respect and the shared knowledge of the dangers that hunted them both. And as the sun rose higher over the gorge, the world beyond seemed distant and unreal. Here, in the hidden canyon, for the first time, they were not hunter and hunted. They were simply two people surviving the desert together. The morning light stretched across the gorge, casting jagged shadows that danced along the rocks. Ayanna shifted uncomfortably, testing her bruised ribs and swollen ankle. The night had been restless, filled with the distant sounds of movement hooves on stone. branches snapping, and though the Comanches had not caught up, the sense of being hunted lingered like a shadow she could not shake. She glanced at Dakota, who had settled beside a small stream that trickled through the gorge. He moved with quiet efficiency, collecting water, examining the terrain, ever watchful. For a long time, neither spoke. Ayanna thought about the choice she faced: return to her people, risk capture or betrayal, or stay with this silent Apache stranger who had, against all expectation, saved her life. Pride warred with practicality. She had always believed that survival was a solitary act, that trust was dangerous, that accepting help was a weakness. Yet here, with Dakota, the world seemed different. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady though her heart raced. "I will go my own way once the danger passes. You've done enough for me." Dakota glanced at her without turning fully. "Do you think danger is gone?" he asked quietly. His words were measured, his tone calm, but the underlying caution was unmistakable. "The men who took you will not give up easily. They will search every trail, every canyon, until they find you or me." Ayanna's jaw tightened. She had underestimated the Comancheros' persistence. The thought of facing them alone made her stomach knot. Yet she hated to admit the truth aloud. She was afraid. "I do not want to leave you," she said softly, the words surprising even herself. "But I also do not want to owe you anything." Dakota looked at her then, truly looked, and in his dark, steady eyes she saw neither judgment nor expectation. He saw her not as property, not as a burden, not as a prize, but as a person with agency and choice. "You owe me nothing," he said quietly. "Stay because it is your choice. Leave if you must. Either path is yours." Ayanna stared at the flowing stream, the sun glinting off the water, reflecting shards of light across the canyon walls. Her pride wanted her to refuse, to assert her independence. Her instincts, however, whispered a different truth. She would survive longer with him than without him. Minutes passed in silence, the canyon holding its breath as if waiting for her decision. Finally, she exhaled, letting her shoulders drop slightly. "Then I stay," she said. The words were firm, deliberate, carrying with them the full weight of her choice. "I stay until it is safe to leave. Not because I have to, but because I choose to." Dakota's face remained calm, though a flicker of relief passed through his eyes. He did not speak immediately, simply observing her, acknowledging her decision with the quiet respect that had defined his every action since the auction. They spent the rest of the morning preparing the gorge as a temporary refuge. Dakota gathered firewood and checked the surrounding ridges for signs of approach. Ayanna moved beside him, tending to her minor wounds. Learning small survival techniques he showed her with patience: how to find water hidden under stones, how to read the wind for signs of distant movement, how to use the terrain to their advantage. By midday, the gorge felt less like a trap and more like a sanctuary. Ayanna realized that staying with Dakota was not a compromise of her pride or independence. It was a strategic choice, a partnership born of necessity, trust, and mutual respect. She felt a spark of connection, fragile but undeniable, beginning to grow between them. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the canyon walls in gold and crimson, Dakota finally spoke. "You chose wisely," he said simply, his voice carrying a weight of meaning beyond the words themselves. "Out here, choice can be the difference between life and death." Ayanna nodded, understanding fully. She had survived capture, auction, and the relentless desert. But now, with Dakota beside her, she realized survival was more than endurance. It was the courage to trust, to ally, and most of all, to choose her own path. And for the first time since the auction, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The desert morning was heavy with tension. Red Mesa loomed ahead, a towering formation of crimson rock that jutted into the sky like a sentinel. Dakota and Ayanna rode carefully along the ridge, their horses steady but tense, ears flicking at every sound. The distant thunder of hooves echoed across the valley below, too close for comfort. The Comanches had tracked them through the canyon, relentless and unforgiving. Dakota stopped his horse and gestured to a flat ledge overlooking the valley. "Here," he said. "We make our stand." His eyes swept over the terrain, noting every boulder, every crevice, every shadow that could serve as cover. "They'll come for you, but we'll turn the land to our advantage." Ayanna dismounted, muscles trembling but mind sharp. She had learned much in the days since the auction, how to move quietly, how to read the desert, how to fight when necessary. Now, standing beside Dakota, she felt a blend of fear and exhilaration. This was no longer about running. This was about facing danger on her terms. Below, the Comanches advanced in a loose formation, their torches bobbing in the dim light. They shouted threats, their voices carrying across the valley, but Dakota paid them no heed. Instead, he turned to Ayanna. "Remember what I showed you," he whispered. "The rocks, the shadows, they are ours. Move only when I signal. We are not running. We are hunting." Ayanna nodded, adrenaline sharpening her focus. Her heart pounded, but she felt a strange calm, grounded by Dakota's steady presence. He handed her a short knife, worn but razor-sharp. She gripped it tightly, knuckles white, eyes never leaving the advancing group. The first Comanche reached the base of Red Mesa, scanning the ridge. Dakota shifted slightly, unseen behind a boulder, and in a flash, a rock dislodged from above, striking the man squarely on the shoulder. He cried out, stumbling backward, and a ripple of panic passed through the group. Ayanna's breath caught, but she moved instinctively, darting between rocks, using the terrain to conceal her presence. Dakota's voice was a low, guiding force. "Left, move left." She obeyed, sliding along the ridge, watching as their pursuers struggled to anticipate their movements. The Comanches regrouped, shouting curses, and attempted to climb the mesa. But Dakota had anticipated every approach. He and Ayanna worked in tandem, flanking, striking from cover, disappearing before the attackers could respond. Ayanna realized with grim satisfaction that she had become more than prey. She was a participant, a partner in this battle for survival. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as the skirmish continued. Sweat and dust coated their skin, and the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the mesa. The Comanches, frustrated and injured, began to retreat, realizing that the ridge was a trap they could not conquer. Dakota allowed himself a brief exhale. He glanced at Ayanna, whose face was streaked with sweat and dirt, her dark hair sticking to her forehead. Her eyes met his, fierce and unbroken. No words were necessary. They understood each other perfectly. "You fought well," he said quietly, admiration in his voice. "Better than most men I've seen." Ayanna allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I had a good teacher." Dakota shook his head slightly. "No, you had courage. I only showed you the way." The Comanches disappeared into the distance, their shouts fading like a bad memory. The mesa stood silent once more, the wind carrying only the sound of the desert and their own breathing. Ayanna sank to a flat rock, gripping her knees, realizing the fight had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had faced death and survived, not because of luck, but because she had learned to trust herself and Dakota. He knelt beside her, scanning the horizon. "We are not yet safe," he said, "but you have proven something important. You are stronger than you know." And for the first time, Ayanna allowed herself to believe it. They had faced the desert, the hunters, and the relentless danger of the frontier, and they had survived together. The mesa. bathed in the harsh glow of the desert sun, seemed less like a trap and more like a place of triumph. Side by side, Apache and Comanche, they had turned the chase into a stand and lived to see the day. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but now a new presence approached, not the hostile, relentless Comancheros, but figures moving with precision and purpose. Comanche scouts. Their approach was quiet at first, distant dust clouds visible only to those who knew how to read the land. Ayana's heart leapt at the sight, her people, her tribe, the one she had feared she might never see again. Dakota signaled for caution, his hand raised, his eyes scanning the ridge above and below. "Do not move yet," he whispered. "Let me assess them first." Ayana nodded, though her pulse raced with anticipation. She had survived the auction, the chase, and the stand at Red Mesa. Yet this moment, the possibility of returning to her people, filled her with a mixture of hope, fear, and uncertainty. The scouts approached cautiously, eyes sharp, weapons at the ready. They slowed as they reached the base of the mesa, and for the first time, one of them recognized Ayana. His eyes widened, and a shout rang out, startling the wind. "Ayana!" She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to run to them, to throw herself into their protection, but something stopped her. She glanced at Dakota, whose expression remained unreadable but steady. His gaze held hers, silent and calm. "You go." "With them," he said softly, almost a whisper, "if that is your choice." "I will not interfere." Ayana's chest tightened. She had promised herself freedom, yet the thought of leaving Dakota after all they had endured made her stomach churn. Still, loyalty to her tribe, to the people she had almost lost, tugged at her heart. She stepped forward slowly, then hesitated again. One of the scouts approached, extending a hand. "You are safe now," he said. "We've come for you." Ayana turned to Dakota. I could not have survived without you," she said, voice trembling with gratitude. "You saved my life." Dakota's jaw tightened slightly. He nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond they had forged. "I only did what I could. You are stronger than you know. Remember that." The scouts exchanged wary glances, noticing the Apache beside her. Their eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into their faces. "Who is this?" One demanded, hand resting on his weapon. Ayana stepped forward, placing herself between Dakota and the scouts. "He saved me. He fought for me when no one else would. He is not my enemy." The scouts hesitated, glancing at each other, then slowly lowered their weapons. One of the elders, an older warrior with deep lines carved into his face, stepped forward. He studied Dakota carefully, then nodded once. "You risked your life for her. That earns respect." Dakota inclined his head slightly, never breaking eye contact with Ayana. "I sought only to ensure her safety, nothing more." The elder studied them both a moment longer, then motioned for the scouts to step back. "She may return to us, but your honor is recognized." "Go in peace, Apache." Ayana exhaled, relief washing over her like a wave. She turned to Dakota, her chest tight with emotion. "Will I see you again?" she asked softly. Dakota's eyes darkened, unreadable. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "But for now, your path lies with your people." Ayana nodded, understanding the truth behind his words. Survival, respect, and trust had brought them this far, but the future remained uncertain. She looked back at him, then forward to the scouts waiting to escort her. As she walked toward them, she realized something vital. Dakota had given her more than protection. He had given her choice, and with it, the courage to reclaim her own destiny. The scouts led her carefully down the ridge, and Dakota watched from above, silent and steady. Dust rose behind them, a reminder of the battles fought and the trials survived. And though they were separated for now, a bond had been forged that neither distance nor time could easily sever. Ayana's heart swelled with gratitude, hope, and an unspoken promise. She would not forget the quiet Apache who had stepped forward when no one else would. The sun hung low over the desert as Ayana and the Comanche scouts approached her village. The familiar mesas and plains stretched before her like an old memory, yet everything felt different. She had survived the auction, the chase, and the deadly stand at Red Mesa. She had fought beside Dakota, the quiet Apache who had defied expectations, saved her life, and treated her with a respect she had never known. As they neared the edge of the village, Ayana's heart tugged unexpectedly in another direction toward him. She realized that she did not want to part ways, that the bond forged through danger, trust, and mutual respect had grown deeper than either had admitted. Fear of loss, mingled with admiration and gratitude, filled her chest with a force she could no longer ignore. When the scouts paused at the village's entrance, Ayana stepped forward. Her dark eyes scanned the ridges and the desert beyond, and there he was, Dakota, standing a short distance away, his posture calm, his expression unreadable but attentive. She approached him, each step deliberate, her pulse quickening. I will not leave," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Not yet, not without you." Dakota's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something unspoken passing across his features. He remained silent, letting her words settle as if weighing their meaning carefully. The desert wind tugged at her hair, but she stood firm, determined. "You do not owe me anything," he said finally, his voice quiet, measured, yet carrying the weight of truth. "I only did what I could to keep you safe. Your path is yours to choose." Ayana shook her head, stepping closer. "I choose to stay. Not because you saved me, not because I have to, but because I want to, because you saw me when no one else would, because you treated me as a person, not a prize. And I do not want to walk this life without you." For a moment, Dakota said nothing. His dark eyes studied hers, searching, as if measuring her courage, her honesty, her intent. Then, slowly, he smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of his lips that spoke volumes. "You are bold," he said, "and stubborn, much like I imagined a Comanche warrior should be." Ayana smiled faintly, but did not let her guard down. "I survived this long because I'm stubborn, and I am alive because of you. But I am not your captive." "I will not be. You will never be," he said, his voice firm. "You are free, but perhaps free alongside me." The desert seemed to pause around them. The wind softened, carrying the scent of sage and juniper. The scouts watched silently, unsure whether to intervene, but Ayana and Dakota needed no audience. This was a choice between two people who had faced death together, survived, and discovered an unexpected bond in the chaos of the frontier. She stepped closer still, taking his hand in hers, the first physical connection between them since the auction. "I do not know what comes next," she admitted, voice trembling with emotion, "but I wanted to be with you. I trust you." Dakota looked down at their hands, then up into her eyes. His jaw tightened briefly, as if holding back a torrent of unspoken feelings, and finally he nodded. "Then we walked together," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Not as captor and captive, not as rescuer and rescued. As equals, as partners." Ayana's chest swelled with relief and hope. She had survived the desert, the danger, and the cruelty of the auction, but now she had something more: choice, freedom, and the possibility of love born from respect and courage. The sun dipped lower, bathing the desert in gold and crimson as they walked toward the village side by side. The scouts followed at a distance, giving them space, and the desert stretched out endlessly before them, full of unknowns and possibilities. For the first time since the auction, Ayana felt a true sense of peace. She was free, she was alive. And she was no longer alone. Takoda glanced at her, a rare softness in his gaze. "We will face whatever comes next together," he said, and, for the first time in a long while, Ayana smiled, not with defiance, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty that she had found a place and a person worth fighting for.